My boyfriend makes a lot of money, but when I asked him to help pay for my ex's surgery, he told me to get a job and broke up with me. Main story. I have always believed that the universe puts us in specific positions of power so that we can act as vessels of grace for those less fortunate. A concept, and Mark never quite grasped despite my constant guidance. Mark is a senior project manager at a top-tier architectural firm, and honestly, his bank account has more zeros than he knows what to do with while I've been focusing on my spiritual and creative growth. Our relationship was, for the most part, a testament to my patience and my ability to overlook his rather clinical and detached view of the world. I moved into his penthouse about a year ago, bringing a much-needed sense of soul to his sterile, expensive walls, and I really thought we were building a future based on shared abundance. He would often brag about his bonuses and his investments, and I would just nod, thinking about how that wealth could be channeled into something more meaningful than just another vintage watch. It wasn't that I wanted his money for myself, because I'm far too evolved for such petty materialism, but I did expect him to understand the responsibilities that come with such a high income. Everything was going perfectly until Daniel, my ex-boyfriend from 3 years ago, reached out to me in a state of absolute despair because he was facing a life-threatening medical crisis. Daniel is a musician, a beautiful but fragile soul who never managed to navigate the harsh realities of the capitalist system, and he found himself needing a $25,000 surgery for a complicated hernia that was causing internal damage. When he told me, I didn't see an X. I saw a human being in agony, and my heart immediately began to calculate how I could solve this because that's just the kind of person I am. I spent a whole afternoon sitting at Mark's Italian marble kitchen island, drafting a detailed budget on a legal pad to show exactly how we, or rather Mark, could cover this without even feeling it. In my mind, it was a simple math problem. Mark had a surplus, Daniel had a deficit, and I was the bridge of compassion connecting the two. I felt a sense of holy purpose as I organized the numbers, even factoring in a small amount for Daniel's post-operative recovery and some holistic supplements I knew he'd need. I waited for Mark to come home from a particularly lucrative closing, thinking he would be in a giving mood and ready to embrace the opportunity to be a hero. When he walked in, I didn't beat around the bush because honesty is the foundation of any real connection, so I presented him with my handwritten spreadsheet and explained the situation with Daniel. I told him that this was a test from the universe, a chance for him to prove that he wasn't just a corporate machine but a man with a heart capable of selfless acts. Mark looked at the paper, then at me, and his face didn't soften with empathy. Instead, it took on this hard, confused expression that I found incredibly disappointing, and frankly, quite alarming. He asked me why on earth he would pay for the medical expenses of a man he had never met, and who had, quite frankly, treated me poorly during our past relationship. I had to explain to him, very slowly, that resentment is a low-vibration emotion, and that Daniel's past mistakes shouldn't sentence him to physical suffering when the solution was sitting right there in Mark's savings account. The conversation quickly devolved because Mark started focusing on boundaries and logic, which are just words people use when they want to excuse their own selfishness. He actually had the nerve to suggest that if I was so concerned, I should find a full-time job to help Daniel myself, completely ignoring the fact that my current pursuit of freelance interior consulting is a full-time emotional labor. I told him that his tone was becoming incredibly aggressive and that his refusal to help was a direct insult to my values and the person I am. I wasn't asking him to buy me a handbag or a car. I was asking him to save a life, and the fact that he was worried about $25,000 when he makes six figures seemed almost sociopathic to me. He kept bringing up the fact that Daniel is an ex, as if that label somehow strips a person of their right to live or my right to care about them. I realized then that Mark wasn't just being stubborn. He was being intentionally cruel to punish me for having a bigger heart than him. The climax of the night happened when I told him that I couldn't be with someone who valued a digital balance in a bank over a human life, expecting him to realize the gravity of his coldness and apologize. Instead of the tearful realization I expected, Mark just stared at me for a long minute and then calmly told me that I was right. We shouldn't be together, and that I had 48 hours to move out. I was absolutely floored by the sheer audacity of his reaction, as if my request for basic human decency was somehow a deal breaker for his precious, curated life. He started packing a small bag, saying he would stay at a hotel so I could pack in peace, and he didn't even look back as he walked out the door of his own apartment. I sat there in the silence of that expensive, hollow penthouse, realizing that I had been sharing my life with a stranger who cared more about his property and rules than the woman he claimed to love. It's truly tragic how some people let money rot their souls to the point where they can't even recognize a genuine cry for help. Main story comments. Anonymous user 1 says, let me get this straight. You asked your current boyfriend to pay $25,000 for your ex's surgery and you're mad he's the one who ended it? You are living in a completely different dimension of entitlement. OP's reply, it's not entitlement to expect a partner to share your moral compass. If you have the means to save someone and you don't, you're complicit in their suffering. I'm sorry you live such a limited transactional life. Anonymous user 2 says Mark dodged a massive, expensive bullet. Why should he fund a guy who used to date you? If you're so noble, why didn't you sell your stuff or work a double shift at a cafe? Up's reply, my stuff is essential to my well-being and my work is on a higher plane than pouring coffee. It's about the principle of abundance which clearly escapes you in Mark. Update 1. It has been exactly 1 week since Mark decided to throw away a 2-year relationship over what essentially amounts to a rounding error in his annual taxes. I spent the first few days in a state of shock, mostly because I couldn't believe someone could be so petty as to kick a woman out for simply having a conscience. I moved into a friend's spare room, which is nowhere near the standard I'm used to, by the way, and spent my time drafting a comprehensive manifesto on empathy and financial responsibility to send to Mark. I figured that once the initial shock of my request wore off, he would come to his senses and realize that I was actually trying to help him become a better man. I sent the document, which was about 12 pages of deep psychological analysis and quotes about generosity, but he didn't even have the courtesy to acknowledge receipt. Instead, he had his assistant send me a brief email asking when the rest of my boxes would be cleared out, which was just so beneath him. Since Mark was being so intentionally difficult and blocked my number, I realized I had to take matters into my own hands to save poor Daniel, who was getting worse by the day. I decided to start a GoFundMe campaign, but I knew that for it to be successful, it needed a hook that people could relate to. I titled it, A Crisis of the Heart. Help us save a kind soul. And in the description I mentioned how my partner's sudden change of heart had left us in a lurch. I didn't use Mark's full name, but I did include photos of us in his penthouse to show the lifestyle that was now being denied to the cause, which I thought was a very clever way to highlight the injustice. I also shared the link with all of Mark's colleagues and some of his business contacts on LinkedIn, because I felt they deserved to know the true character of the man they were working with. If he wasn't going to give the money directly, the least he could do is provide the social capital necessary to raise it from people who actually have souls. The backlash from this was almost immediate and frankly quite hysterical, as if I had committed some kind of crime by telling the truth. Several of Mark's work friends messaged me saying I was unhinged and damaging his reputation, which is hilarious because he's doing that all by himself with his greed. One woman who I always suspected was jealous of my relationship with Mark even threatened to report the fundraiser for misrepresentation. I don't see how it's misrepresentation when everything I wrote was based on my personal experience of his coldness and Daniel's very real medical need. I stayed firm, replying to every hateful comment with a reminder that they were choosing to side with a wealthy man over a dying artist. I even posted a video of me crying, explaining how hard it is to be the only person in a social circle who actually cares about the little guy. By the end of the week, the fundraiser had only raised about $300, which is a pathetic reflection of the state of the world today. Daniel called me, sounding very weak, and asked if Mark had changed his mind yet, and I had to tell him that Mark was being influenced by dark energies and ego. Daniel seemed frustrated, which I understand, but then he started asking why I hadn't just asked my parents or sold my designer bags. I felt so betrayed by that suggestion because those bags were gifts and they represent my personal journey and aesthetic identity. It's like no one understands that I am already sacrificing so much by dealing with all this stress and the loss of my home. I'm the one doing the emotional heavy lifting here, and yet I'm the one being questioned at every turn by people who should be thanking me for my efforts. Update 1 comments. Anonymous user 1 says you sent his coworkers a GoFundMe and used his house photos? That is literal harassment and social suicide. You're lucky he hasn't called the cops for defamation yet. Up's reply: truth is not defamation. If he's embarrassed by his own actions being made public, that's a him problem, not a me problem. I'm just a mirror reflecting his lack of light. Anonymous user 2 says, even the ex is asking why you won't sell your bags. If his life is worth $25,000, surely your aesthetic identity can take a hit for a few purses? You're a total hypocrite. Oops replied, those bags are my tools for networking and maintaining my frequency. If I look like a nobody, I can't help anyone. It's about strategy, but I don't expect a troll to understand high-level branding. Update 2. 2 weeks have passed since the great betrayal, and instead of things settling down, everyone has decided to turn up the heat on me for no reason. I received a formal cease and desist letter from a law firm representing Mark, which was just so typical of him using his money to hire bullies instead of using it to help a person in need. The letter claimed I was harassing his professional network and using his likeness and property to solicit funds under false pretenses. I spent 2 hours on the phone with the law firm's receptionist trying to explain that they were on the wrong side of history, but she was just as robotic and soulless as Mark. I eventually had to take down the GoFundMe because the platform flagged it after a coordinated attack by Mark's cronies, which is basically digital book burning. I was so indignant that I spent the whole night shaking, wondering how a person I once loved could be so litigious and petty over a simple act of advocacy. To make matters worse, Daniel has started becoming incredibly demanding and, dare I say, a bit ungrateful about the whole situation. He keeps calling me from the hospital he's finally been admitted for observation and asking for updates on the money as if I'm an ATM. When I told him about the legal threats from Mark and the fundraiser being shut down, he actually had the audacity to raise his voice at me. He said that I had stirred up a hornet's nest for nothing, and that now Mark would never help him because I made it personal. I tried to explain to him that the hornet's nest was Mark's own making, and that I was just the messenger, but Daniel wouldn't listen. He even suggested that I should have just played the game, and stayed with Mark until I could trick him into paying. Just so manipulative, and beneath my dignity. I feel like I'm being attacked from all sides. My ex thinks I'm a failure, my former boyfriend thinks I'm a criminal, and the internet is full of people who don't understand the concept of radical empathy. I went to the penthouse. I still have my key, which I haven't returned because I haven't finished processing the transition to try and talk to Mark man to man. I didn't even get past the lobby because he had already instructed the doorman to deny me entry and had the locks changed on the unit. I stood there in the lobby in front of everyone, feeling like a common trespasser in a building where I used to host dinner parties. It was a complete humiliation, and I made sure to let the doorman know that he was complicit in an act of domestic and emotional displacement. He just looked away, probably because he couldn't handle the truth of what he was doing to a woman of my standing. Because I can't access my things and the $300 from the fundraiser is stuck in verification limbo. I've had to rely on the kindness of strangers, which in this city means sleeping on a very uncomfortable couch in a studio apartment. My friend who is hosting me has started dropping hints about utility costs and finding a job, which is just so incredibly tactless given the trauma I'm currently navigating. I told her that my job right now is managing a medical and legal crisis, but she just rolled her eyes and went back to her mindless 9-to-5. It's becoming very clear to me that I am the only person in this entire narrative who is acting with any kind of moral consistency. Everyone else is just obsessed with their own comfort and their own tiny, insignificant rules, while a human being's life hangs in the balance. Update 2 comments. Anonymous user 1 says you tried to go back to the penthouse after being dumped and served with a cease and desist. That's not processing, that's trespassing. That's trespassing. You're lucky you weren't arrested on the spot. Ops reply, I lived there. It was my home. A piece of paper from a lawyer doesn't instantly erase the energetic imprint I left on that space. I went there to offer him one last chance at redemption. Anonymous user 2 says even the dying ex is calling you out for being a drama queen. Stirring up a hornet's nest is the perfect description of what you did. You ruined his only chance at help by being a narcissist. OP's reply, Daniel is speaking from a place of pain and low-frequency fear. He doesn't see the big picture like I do. I didn't ruin anything. Mark's choice to say no was the only thing that ruined anything. Update 3. 1 month has passed since the world decided to punish me for being a good person, and I am currently living in a budget motel that smells like industrial cleaner and broken dreams. My so-called friend kicked me out because I wasn't contributing, and because I accidentally used her credit card to order some high-vibrational meal kits. I thought she would understand it was a medical necessity for my stress levels. I tried to reach out to Mark's mother, who always said she liked my spirit, thinking she would be the voice of reason and talk some sense into her son. I sent her a long, beautiful email detailing how Mark had abandoned his values and how Daniel was suffering because of it. She replied with a one-sentence email saying, "Please do not contact me or my family again, or we will be forced to involve the authorities," which was a total dagger to the heart. It's clear where Mark gets his cold, calculating nature from. It's a genetic deficiency of the soul. While I was busy being shunned by the elite, Daniel somehow managed to get his surgery through a community outreach program and a local charity I hadn't even heard of. You would think he would call me immediately to thank me for the month of hell I went through trying to advocate for him, but no. I found out through a mutual friend's Instagram story where he was pictured in a hospital bed, smiling and looking relieved. When I finally got him on the phone, his tone was so incredibly dismissive it made my blood boil. He told me that the charity only took his case because they saw the mess I was making online and wanted to quiet the situation before it reflected poorly on the local arts scene. He actually told me to stay away from him and that he didn't want my toxic brand of help anywhere near his recovery. Can you believe the absolute nerve of this man? I was the only one who stood up for him when he was a nobody with a hernia, and now that he's had his surgery, I'm toxic. It's a classic case of people using you as a stepping stone and then throwing you away once they've reached the other side. I spent weeks of my life, lost my relationship with a millionaire, and lost my home. All for a man who won't even credit me for the noise I created. That ultimately got him noticed. If I hadn't made that GoFundMe and tagged all those influential people, that charity would never have looked his way. I am the architect of his survival, and yet I am being treated like a pariah by the very person whose life I saved. To top it all off, I tried to file for palimony, or some kind of unjust enrichment against Mark, because I feel I'm entitled to a severance for the 2 years I spent improving his life. The lawyer I consulted, who I had to pay with the last of my savings, actually laughed in my face and told me I had no legal stand-in because we weren't married, and I hadn't contributed financially to the household. He had the gall to say that Mark supporting me for 2 years was already a gift, completely ignoring the spiritual and emotional labor I provided daily. I left his office in tears, realizing that the legal system is just another tool designed to protect the haves from the have-nots who actually have hearts. I am now officially broke, alone, and living in a room with a flickering neon sign outside. All because I dared to ask a rich man to be a human being. Update 3 comments. Anonymous user 1 says, "Accidentally used her credit card. That's called credit card fraud, honey. No wonder she kicked you out. I'm not a martyr, you're a common thief with a savior complex." Ops reply, "It was an authorized use in my mind because of our friendship. I was going to pay her back once my abundance manifested. People are so obsessed with theft and laws instead of human connection." Anonymous user 2 says, "So the ex got the surgery through a charity and told you to stay away? That should be your final clue. Everyone in your life is telling you the same thing, you are the problem." Ops reply, "They are all echoing each other because they're part of the same echo chamber of mediocrity. It's easier to blame me than to admit they're ungrateful. I'm the only one who stayed true to the mission." Update 4. It's been a few months now, and I've finally settled into a small, rather drab apartment on the outskirts of the city, working a job in retail that is utterly beneath my intellectual and spiritual capacity. I see Mark's name in the business section occasionally, winning awards for innovation, and I just have to laugh at the irony of a man being celebrated for building things when he's so expert at tearing people down. He's probably dating some corporate drone now who doesn't challenge him or ask him to be anything more than a paycheck. And honestly, I pity them both. They'll live a life of perfectly manicured lawns and empty souls, never knowing the chaos of true, unfiltered compassion that I brought into that penthouse. I still haven't sent him a thank you for the lessons he thinks he taught me, because the only thing I learned is that money truly is the root of all evil when it's held by the wrong hands. Daniel is back to playing gigs and hasn't sent me a single cent or a thank you note, which just goes to show that some people are destined to remain in a cycle of poverty because they don't know how to honor their benefactors. I see his posts. Sometimes, I haven't blocked him because I want to keep an eye on my investment, and he looks so happy, completely oblivious to the trail of destruction he left in my life. It's fascinating how the victim always moves on so quickly while the savior is left to pick up the pieces of the world that broke around them. I sometimes wonder if he ever wakes up in the middle of the night and realizes that he owes his very breath to the noise I made. But I doubt it. Gratitude is a high-frequency emotion, and Daniel has always lived in the basement of the soul. I've started a new blog called The Cost of Conscience, where I document my journey and warn other women about the dangers of dating men who have wealth but no worth. It's become a bit of a sanctuary for other misunderstood souls who have been discarded by a society that prizes logic over love. I've had to block a lot of trolls who claim I'm delusional or narcissistic, but I know that's just the world's way of trying to silence a woman who speaks her truth. If being delusional means believing that a human life is worth more than a bank balance, then I will wear that label with pride for the rest of my days. I'm a martyr for the new age, a woman who sacrificed everything to prove a point that the world wasn't ready to hear. Ultimately, I'm the only one who can sleep at night knowing I did everything in my power to be a good person in a world that rewards bad behavior. Arneshor has his millions, Daniel has his health, and I have my integrity, which is far more valuable than any surgery or penthouse. I might be eating generic brand cereal and taking the bus, but my spirit is untainted by the greed and selfishness that defines everyone else in this story. I am waiting for the universe to balance the scales because I know that a soul as pure and dedicated as mine cannot be kept down for long. Until then, I will continue to be the light in the darkness, even if the darkness is too stubborn to admit it needs me.